Have you ever opened your front door and found a piece of paper that threatened to take away everything you've worked for? That's exactly what happened to Michael Thompson on a quiet Tuesday evening, a day that began ordinary but ended with his entire world turned upside down. Michael had always been the kind of man who kept to himself. His lawn was neat, his house freshly painted, and his driveway free of clutter. He paid his dues on time and never caused trouble in his suburban neighborhood. To him, life was simple until that letter arrived. Taped to his front door in bold print were the words, $250,000 fine. At first, Michael thought it must be a mistake, maybe even a prank. But as he unfolded the pages, his heart began to race. The HOA had listed pages upon pages of so-called violations. According to them, his fence was out of regulation height, his porch light was not in uniform color, and his garden plants were not HOA approved. The accusations grew more ridiculous with each line, yet the fine at the bottom was no joke, $250,000. Michael sank onto the porch steps, the paper trembling in his hands. How could they fine him such an outrageous amount? He had seen neighbors get fined before, $50 for leaving trash cans out too long, $100 for an unapproved paint color. But this was more than his yearly salary. As he sat there, his mind replayed every interaction he'd ever had with the HOA. The meetings where Karen, the HOA president, spoke with an air of superiority. The letters she sent out like warnings from a queen to her subjects. Michael had ignored most of it, thinking if he stayed quiet, they'd leave him alone. But now he realized no one was safe from their reach. The weight of the fine pressed heavily on his chest. If they were serious, they could place liens, drag him to court, even take his house. The idea of losing the very home he had built memories in felt unbearable. As the sun dipped behind the rooftops, Michael stared at the letter one more time. Anger mixed with fear, and fear mixed with something else, determination. He wasn't going to let this letter define him. He didn't know it yet, but the fight ahead would reveal a truth so powerful it would shake the entire neighborhood. The very next week, Michael walked into the community clubhouse where the monthly HOA meeting was being held. Rows of folding chairs faced a long table where the board members sat, their expressions cold and expectant. Karen, the HOA president, adjusted her glasses and cleared her throat as though preparing for a performance. "Michael Thompson," she announced, her voice echoing across the room. "You've received notice of the fine. We are here today to discuss payment." Every head in the room turned toward him. Some neighbors whispered, others avoided his gaze. Michael felt like he was standing on trial. He clutched the letter tightly in his hand, his knuckles white, but he kept his voice steady. "This has to be a mistake," Michael said calmly. "I've done nothing to deserve this. There is no basis for such a fine." Karen smirked, leaning back in her chair. "Nothing to deserve this? The board has reviewed everything carefully. You are in violation of our community standards, and the fine stands." Michael's chest tightened. He looked around the room for support, but most of the neighbors stayed silent. A few shifted uncomfortably, unwilling to challenge the board. Michael had always known the HOA could be strict, but the arrogance in Karen's tone cut deeper than any rulebook one. "What if I don't pay?" he asked, forcing the question out. Karen's smirk widened. "Then the HOA has the right to take further action. That could include liens against your property, legal filings, even foreclosure if necessary. You may lose your home, Mr. Thompson. Think very carefully before resisting." The words struck like a hammer. The thought of losing his home, the place filled with years of memories, made his stomach churn. He pictured his father sitting on the porch years ago, reminding him that land is more than soil and wood. It's legacy. That memory alone gave him strength to keep standing, even as Karen's words threatened to break him. "You can't just threaten people into silence," Michael said firmly. "This isn't right." The room buzzed with murmurs. For a split second, Michael caught the eye of a neighbor who looked almost supportive, but fear quickly silenced them. The board had ruled this neighborhood for years, and no one dared to challenge them. Karen tapped her pen against the table. "You have 30 days to comply. No exceptions. Michael walked out of that clubhouse with his head spinning. The fine wasn't just money, it was a weapon. The HOA had drawn a line in the sand, and they thought he would bow under pressure. But as Michael stepped into the night air, something inside him shifted. He wouldn't surrender so easily. That night, Michael sat at his dining table with the HOA's letter spread out before him. His mind was restless, looping through Karen's threats, her smug expression, the whispers of neighbors who seemed too afraid to speak up. For the first time in years, Michael felt cornered. But then, a memory stirred. His father. He remembered how, before he passed, his dad often spoke about the land, about how much more it meant than just a backyard or a street to live on. Michael, he once said, land isn't just where you stand, it's what you pass on. Those words echoed as Michael stood up and walked into the attic. Dust swirled in the air as he pulled down an old wooden box. Inside were faded family documents, yellowed with age. He hadn't touched them in years, but tonight, something told him he needed to. He carried the box downstairs, setting it carefully on the table. With each paper he unfolded, his heartbeat grew faster. Property deeds, old maps, letters between lawyers and his grandfather. They painted a picture Michael had never pieced together before. One map in particular stopped him cold. It outlined not just his house, but acres of surrounding land. The streets, the clubhouse, even the manicured lawns the HOA took such pride in. According to the records, the property was still in his family's name. Michael blinked, reading the legal descriptions again and again. Could it be true? Had the HOA been operating all these years without realizing the ground beneath them wasn't even theirs? He hurried through the rest of the documents, comparing dates and signatures. Everything matched. His father had never sold the land. The HOA may have built fences and held meetings, but they were standing on property that is still legally belonged to him. For a moment, Michael just sat back, stunned. The fine that had nearly broken him suddenly looked meaningless. All their threats, their arrogant demands, it was possible they held no power at all. But doubt crept in. What if he was reading it wrong? What if the documents were outdated? He couldn't rely on assumptions, not when the stakes were this high. He needed confirmation. That's when he picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. A real estate attorney his father once trusted. "Hello?" the woman answered. "Hi," Michael said, his voice steady but urgent. "My name is Michael Thompson. I think I need your help. I may own a lot more land than I realize." The next morning, Michael sat nervously in the quiet office of Rachel Grant, a seasoned real estate attorney his father had once trusted. The walls were lined with shelves of heavy law books, and the faint scent of old paper filled the air. Michael placed the worn documents on her desk, his fingers lingering on them as if afraid they might vanish. Rachel adjusted her glasses and began reading through the stack. The room was silent except for the soft shuffle of papers. With every page she turned, her brow furrowed deeper. Michael sat frozen, his heart pounding. Finally, she looked up. "Michael," she said slowly, "these aren't just outdated family keepsakes. These are valid property deeds. And if what I'm seeing is correct..." She spread the map across the desk, tracing the outlines with her pen. "Your ownership extends far beyond your home. In fact, most of this neighborhood, including the land under the HOA clubhouse, falls under your name." Michael's breath caught. Hearing it out loud made the possibility feel real and terrifying. "You're saying the HOA has no legal authority here?" Rachel leaned back in her chair. "If these documents hold up in county records, and from the signatures and stamps I've seen, they should, then yes. The HOA has been enforcing rules on land they don't technically own, which means the fines, the threats, none of it carries weight." The words struck him like lightning. Relief, disbelief, and a spark of power coursed through him all at once. For weeks he had felt like prey being cornered. But now he wasn't the prey at all. Rachel's tone softened. "You'll need to be careful. Challenging the HOA won't be easy. They won't just roll over, but with the right steps, the law is on your side." Michael nodded, gripping the edge of the desk. For the first time since receiving that letter, he felt hope. But he also knew this revelation wasn't just about proving his innocence. It was bigger. The HOA had ruled this neighborhood with intimidation and fear. Now he held the truth that could change everything. As he left Rachel's office, the documents tucked safely under his arm, Michael walked with a new steadiness in his stride. The same clubhouse where he had been humiliated days ago now looked different in his mind. It wasn't theirs, it was his. The community clubhouse buzzed with the usual chatter when Michael stepped inside. He carried a thick folder under his arm, the documents that had changed everything pressed tightly against his chest. Heads turned as he walked toward the front, and whispers followed him. Everyone remembered the man who had been slapped with a $250,000 fine just weeks ago. Now he walked in with a quiet confidence that demanded attention. Karen, the HOA president, spotted him immediately. Her eyes narrowed and she straightened in her chair. "Michael Thompson," she said sharply, "we were expecting you. Are you ready to settle your outstanding balance?" Michael opened the folder and laid the documents on the table, spreading them out so everyone could see. The yellowed deeds, maps, and letters seemed almost alive under the overhead lights. He looked at Karen calmly, letting the weight of the silence stretch before he spoke. "I'm not here to pay any fines," Michael said firmly, "because these fines, these threats, they were never yours to enforce. According to these documents, I own most of the land in this neighborhood, including the property under the clubhouse, the streets, and even the common areas you've been managing." The room froze. Karen's smirk vanished, replaced by a pale, tight-lipped expression. Murmurs rippled through the neighbors. Some gasped, others whispered questions, and a few mouths hung open in disbelief. Michael could see the board members shifting uncomfortably in their seats, unsure of how to respond. Rachel's voice, calm but firm, cut through the tension. "We've reviewed the deeds, and they're legally binding. The HOA has no authority to issue these fines or claim control over the property. Mr. Thompson is the rightful owner." Karen opened her mouth to argue, but her voice faltered. Every claim she had made, every threat she had issued, now looked hollow. The power dynamic had shifted entirely. Michael kept his gaze steady. He wasn't there to humiliate. He was there to set things right. "This isn't about revenge," he said. "It's about fairness and honesty. The neighborhood deserves clarity, and the truth is finally here." A neighbor who had been quietly observing finally spoke up. "So, all this time we've been following rules for land that wasn't even theirs?" "Yes," Michael said softly, letting the reality sink in. "But that changes now. The rules going forward will be fair, transparent, and above all, legal." Karen sank back into her chair, defeated. For the first time, the aura of control she had wielded for years evaporated. Michael's heart pounded, not from fear, but from a sense of justice finally being restored. By the end of that tense HOA meeting, the entire room felt different. The air, once heavy with authority and intimidation, now buzzed with disbelief and uncertainty. Karen, who had ruled the neighborhood with unwavering control, sat quietly, staring at the stack of documents Michael had laid before everyone. For the first time, her dominance had been challenged, and it was crumbling. Board members fidgeted in their chairs, unsure of what to do. Years of enforcing fines, sending letters, and threatening owners had suddenly lost their power. Their confidence, built on fear, was gone. Michael watched calmly, realizing that silence now carried more weight than any argument they could make. The neighbors, who had once turned their eyes away or whispered quietly in support of Karen, began to speak. One by one, they voiced their disbelief, confirming what Michael already knew. The HOA had been operating on land they didn't own. Some admitted feeling trapped by the rules, afraid to question authority. Others expressed relief, as though a weight had been lifted. Karen finally found her voice, though it was weaker than before. These documents, we need to verify them." Her tone was defensive, but the hesitation betrayed her. Michael nodded politely. "Please do. You'll see the truth is undeniable." As Rachel, his attorney, outlined the legal facts, murmurs turned into conversations. The neighborhood that had once feared confrontation now realized that their autonomy had been limited by a misunderstanding of ownership. Michael's patience, clarity, and respect had turned the tables entirely. The moment was more than legal. It was emotional. Homeowners who had once followed rules out of fear now felt empowered. Michael saw neighbors exchanging glances of surprise, gratitude, and cautious admiration. He realized that the battle was never about money alone. It had been about control, trust, and respect. Karen finally slumped back, her aura of authority gone. The smirk she once wore with such confidence had disappeared, replaced with a blank expression of disbelief. The HOA's reign had collapsed quietly but completely. Michael felt a mixture of relief and resolve. The neighborhood was no longer ruled by intimidation. It was his responsibility now, in a sense, to help guide it toward fairness and trust. And though the fight was over, the lessons lingered. Control built on fear collapses under truth, and even the strongest authority can fall when challenged wisely. The following days after the HOA meeting felt surreal for Michael. For weeks, he had carried the crushing weight of a $250,000 fine, fearing the loss of his home and his dignity. Now that weight was gone, but in its place came something even heavier: responsibility. Word spread quickly throughout the neighborhood. Neighbors who had once looked at him with pity or judgment now greeted him with cautious respect. Some stopped by his house offering apologies. Others simply nodded politely, as if acknowledging the quiet shift in power. For years, the HOA had ruled them with an iron grip, and now, thanks to one man's persistence, the illusion had shattered. But Michael didn't celebrate. He knew this wasn't about winning a battle against Karen or humiliating the board. It was about rebuilding trust in a community that had been divided for far too long. He didn't want to replace one kind of control with another. Instead, he wanted to set things right. Rachel, his attorney, encouraged him to take legal steps to restructure the agreements. "Michael," she said, "you hold all the cards. You can dissolve the HOA if you wish. You can even demand payment for years of mismanagement. The law is on your side." Michael thought about it long and hard. The temptation to dismantle everything Karen had built was strong. He remembered the sleepless nights, the humiliation, the fear of losing his home. But as he looked out at his neighborhood, the children playing on sidewalks, the families tending gardens, the elderly couples taking evening walks, he realized that tearing everything down would only cause more chaos. What the people needed wasn't revenge. It was peace. At the next community gathering, Michael stood before his neighbors, the same group that had once watched silently as the board threatened him. This time, there was no fear in his voice. "I could fight the HOA until it no longer exists," he said, his voice steady. "I could demand accountability for everything that's happened. But that's not what I want. What I want is fairness. What I want is honesty. What I want is for us to live in a community where people feel safe, respected, and valued." The room was quiet, every eye fixed on him. He continued, "That's why I've decided to restructure the HOA with new leadership and new rules. No more outrageous fines, no more threats. Every decision will be transparent. This neighborhood doesn't belong to one person. It belongs to all of us." For the first time in years, the crowd broke into applause. Relief and gratitude filled the room, and Michael felt a wave of warmth wash over him. People smiled, some even wiping tears from their eyes. The walls of fear that had surrounded them were finally coming down. Karen, sitting quietly in the back, didn't speak. Her reign had ended, and she knew it. She avoided eye contact, her face pale, her pride wounded. But even in her silence, Michael felt no anger. She had been wrong, yes, but bitterness wouldn't heal the scars left behind. Forgiveness, he realized, was the stronger path. Weeks later, the neighborhood felt different. The rules were simple, fair, and respectful. Families began participating in meetings with enthusiasm instead of fear. Michael, though not seeking a title, became a trusted voice, a symbol of resilience and justice. One evening, as he sat on his porch watching the sun dip behind the rooftops, Michael smiled. The fight had started with a letter that threatened to take everything from him. But in the end, it had given him something greater: a stronger community, a deeper appreciation for his father's legacy, and the knowledge that truth, no matter how hidden, always has the power to set people free. And as the neighborhood lights flickered on, Michael felt at peace. The battle was over, and a new beginning had just begun.